Thank you for joining me today on the podcast. We're here at Horrorific, the Romford Horror Film Festival. So James, you were telling me that this was your local cinema when you were growing up.
Well, yeah, I remember it. I remember when it opened in 1990.
Wow.
Yeah. I used to go to the old Odeon in Romford, which is by the station, which became, I think, Laser Quest, and then a dodgy nightclub for many years, which just shut down. But this one opened, summer 19. It was around the summer of 1990.
So my grandparents lived in Romford.
Oh, right.
I lived in. I grew up in Thaden Boys.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So not too far from here. But yeah, my grandparents lived here, and my first cinema experience was in Romford.
Really?
As well. It was the one by the train station. I can't remember what it was called.
Well, there were two. There was one right next to the station, which was the Odeon, and then there was one just about 100 yards away from the station, which was the ABC, the Canon.
Right, okay.
And I used to go to that.
I feel like the ABC may have been the one that I went to. But it felt more... it didn't feel like a chain cinema, from what I can remember. It felt a bit... I only have vague memories of this. I was probably about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And I was watching Oliver and Company. I remember the film very clearly.
Well, yeah, the Disney film.
The Disney one. Yeah. Was it Billy Joel?
Possibly.
I think so.
I'm trying to think if I've ever seen that one.
Yeah, it's not a well-known Disney one, but that was
of their period of creative decline.
But that was my first cinema experience, and it very much felt like I got this vibe of being in some kind of community kind of venue. That's what I mean when I say it didn't feel like a chain.
Well, I think they were very different, weren't they, cinemas back then anyway, because they weren't multiplexes. And I think that cinema had been there a long time. So there were two cinemas basically within walking distance. And I think they both had 3 screens or something like that in each. And then I think they converted the ABC to a number of screens later on. And it was never... I think it may even have been 2 screens, actually, initially in that one. That they had a big screen one. And that was... But I can remember queuing around the corner to get into...
And that doesn't happen anymore.
No. Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
All the way around the corner. But I can remember at the original Odeon, which is opposite the next to the station, it's opposite McDonald's above the station, going with my nan, so it must have been when I was about 5, so around about 1980, 81, because I remember the sign outside was Empire Strikes Back was out. So it was, I think it might have been a re-release of it, but they'd re-released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And the queue for that, this pre-VHS.
Yeah, so
it was all the way round the corner, all the way up past and we didn't get in.
Wow.
Sold out.
Yeah. I had for me, that happened once for me for Independence Day. When Independence Day came out, that was a massive one.
That was a big... Well, it depends. Again, it depends on the size of the screens, I suppose, and the size of the cinema. I mean, I think back then they didn't screen... They wouldn't book out 4, 5, 6 screens, would they, for a film?
No, it'd be on like 1 or 2 showings of an evening, and then if you didn't make that was your opportunity gone. Whereas now, I know that the other Romford cinema, the View round the corner, I sometimes go there because it's quite cheap. It's £5 a ticket. Where I live in Harlow, the cheapest cinema ticket you can get is about £18. So I'll actually come to Romford, especially when I'm bringing my kids to the cinema with me, because it will be for the price of 1 ticket. We can go out as a full family.
Well, I took my daughter out during half term. We went up to town. She wanted to see a film up there. And I think it was 35 quid for 2 tickets.
Yeah, easy.
So it was 50 quid by the time I bought her a drink and something else.
Yeah, have you been to the Blue Water Cinema?
Years ago. I haven't been there for years. I have been there before, yeah.
It's a very comfy cinema, big screen, but you can easily, for a family of 4, spend over £100 to go and see a film there easily.
The view here is pretty good, actually. You can get, like, I think the most expensive seat's probably a tenner.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
But they go all the way down to $4.99, $5.99. Yeah, but it was a period where this one, the premiere, was £3 a ticket.
Yeah.
So obviously you can imagine that the... youngsters came and caused havoc.
So with this cinema, I know that they're doing a lot of crowdfunding and they're trying to get investment to revamp this place and turn this into a new kind of community cinema. They're trying to do something new here.
Well, cinema and I think an local arts sort of hub. I think is the way I sort of understand it. I think 4 screens are going to be sort of showing new releases, the kind of commercial releases that you'd get anywhere else, and then they're going to have some screens put aside for other things, sort of rep screenings or foreign language films or classic films or whatever, and then some other kind of community space. I think that's the plan anyway. Before it was just it was a bog standard cheap. It wasn't a chat. I think there were only 2 premieres at one point in the country, and it was just the cheap multiplex. There would be some things that were shown here that were not shown elsewhere, but pretty much it was the same.
So I can tell, James, that you're a cinema lover, that you love films. So what brings you here to this film festival?
Well, I had a short screening this morning. This is Saturday, so I had a short screening this morning in the Screen 7, and it's on my doorstep. I live in Gidea Park. I grew up in Upminster. So I'm very much a local, but I've been writing for years, and I've been making films for about 10 years, but that sort of grew out of writing really. So that's why I'm here. I had the film screen this morning. It's the first time it's actually been screened at a cinema. I hadn't done that before. I made it back in. It's not a new film. I made it in 2018, but it kind of fitted within the sort of the strictures of the horror festival, shall we say? It's screened in other festivals, and that unfortunately it kind of came out was finished sort of just before COVID.
So that was a tricky time for anyone releasing anything at that moment.
Well, trying to get any attention.
Yeah.
And when the kind of the news of that was sort of trickling out, I was making a short.
Okay.
So in February, I sort of 2020 made a short, and then I realised pretty quickly that we weren't going to be doing anything like this for a while. So I actually ended up doing like the post on that film during lockdown.
Right. Did
it all remotely, working with the editor, grader, sound mixer. Which was pretty good, but it meant that the films that I had didn't really come out. They were both screened, I think, at the end of that year at the Ealing Film Festival. Both won prizes, actually, but they were never screened to the public. So
right, okay.
So that was a problem, and I haven't made another film subsequently. I'm sort of putting that together at the moment, trying to sort of work out the logistics of that. So it was a case of not really they're not getting their kind of moment in the sun, so to speak. So
yeah, I guess when we do make film, we want it to be seen, don't we? We would like an audience to experience it.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I talk a lot about on my podcast. I talk about Rick Rubin. Do you know Rick Rubin at all, the music producer? Yeah, and he always talks about the audience comes last, and we shouldn't be creating our art for others to consume. We should kind of try and do it for ourselves. However, we are looking for it to be consumed, and if we enjoyed it, I guess we hope others will enjoy it as well.
Well, you don't make it in a vacuum, do you? You don't make it to sort of... I mean, you can make things purely for your own enjoyment and entertainment.
I guess then it would just become a kind of diary entry of some sort, and it has the potential to just fade away.
Well, you can do, and I think you always have that issue of vanity publications, vanity filmmaking, make music. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. I mean, but I do think with cinema in particular, but that's true of any art, is that it's the interface between the work and an audience. And if you're the creator, are you really the audience? I'm not sure you are. You can be on one level, but really it's for how people who are not part of that process of creation respond to it. So I would say cinema is about, I mean, and it's different if you put it online. I mean, that's not the same. It's that's a very insular experience. It's a very solitary experience. But if you put it in a room and you're projecting it, whether that's at a festival or it's in a cinema like this, we had about 30 odd people in there this morning, which is not a huge number because there's loads of other screens open for different parts of the festival, but it's a decent sized crowd. And then you're watching your film play to that audience and people reacting. So they laughed in a few places, which was quite good. Which was kind of the most sort of audible reaction of the films that were screened this morning, actually,
Nice.
which was good. So, but I think that's what you do it for. You don't do it for, certainly I don't do what I've done over the years just to please myself. I think you have to do that. But at the same time, I think you've also got to be aware of what works for an audience. What are you trying to get out of the audience as well? What are you trying to evoke in the audience? Sometimes you can not achieve that. But I think the more you do it and the more you see how people respond to your work, I think you kind of, I wouldn't say you can second guess them, but you kind of you become not just the person making the thing, you also become the proxy for the audience as well. So you kind of put yourself in that position, I think. So it's obviously the making of it is it's not, also film is not really the singular experience. You have a crew, you have a cast.
So all the way through
endeavor.
from once you have an idea in filmmaking, all the way past that idea, it becomes a collective experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, the only time you ever sort of really, it's when you write it. I mean, that's you and when you're writing the script. If it's your script you're writing, but let's assume it is. That's the only time it's ever purely you.
Yes, yeah.
Because the minute it's going to be made, it becomes sort of something else. There's a pure version in your head that you're kind of creating when you're putting it on the page. The minute you kind of decide that you're going to make the film, it isn't just making loads of compromises, although that's part of it. It's just making loads of practical decisions. And then it becomes a dynamic process because you're interacting with a production designer. Well, in fact, it's more profound than that. If you're filming outside, for say, you're interacting with the weather. You're interacting with the sound,
with the birds, with the planes,
with the planes, with the traffic. So you have to make.
You have to adapt.
You have to adapt, and it's a thing where it means that it's alive. I mean, in any film is, the old sort of like cliche that it's written once when you write it, it's written when you film it, and then it's written when you edit it. And that's true. I think the filming of it that's what happened on that day or days that you were filming it. You can plan everything, but things will happen that just you can't control. You've got to roll with the punches. The film that I was screening today, I wrote it for a thing. I was on a Channel 4 scheme probably about 15 years ago now, called Coming Up. So they chose me and a bunch of other people to go on this boot camp to whether we would be chosen to make these films for Channel 4. Anyway, one of the tasks was you were given an actor, a single camera. I was there as a writer, not a director, paired with a director who was hearing impaired, which was a challenge, actually, and a video camera. And you could only shoot the film in order on tape. So you had to come up with a film that you could... So you weren't allowed any edits. So you had to film it literally with what was in the camera.
Kind of one take.
One tape, right? So we had an actor. We were given kind of a theme the night before. And I had to go away. So it's the end of the second day. I had to go away and write the script. And... then overnight, and then we would shoot in the afternoon on a particular day. Maybe it was the second day. So it was the first day we were given the brief, and then the second day. So we wrote the kind of script. I wrote the script in sort of as 5 little vignettes that you'd film in order. And we made it with no cuts in that thing. So, and I'd had that script, and it was pretty good. So been sitting around for years, and I decided to I could do that in a day. I could film it in a day. We had the location, which would make it sort of worthwhile doing. Why don't I film it? So anyway, we cast an actress, I should say, to play the lead role. And then she wasn't quite right, but we were going to do the film anyway. And then the day before, she calls up and says, and I was a bit kind of down the day before that it was like, is it going to work?
Because there was this element that wasn't...
Yeah, it wasn't working, but committed to actually getting it. The thing is, you put the thing in motion, you've got everybody kind of converging on the location at this time, the DOP.
So that goes back to being adaptable. You have to work with what you've got.
So you've got to work with what you got. But anyway, she then called and said, I've got an audition at the Royal Court Theatre tomorrow on the shoot day. And like we're filming I think we're filming near Bethnal Green. Royal Court's in, Kensington Way, Chelsea, and that. So I'll be away, and she's in every scene because it's essentially 5 little mini monologues with like cutaways, but that's essentially it. There is no film without that lead character. And I just said, you can't do it. And she said, I know I can't do it. So I said, fine, okay. So my friend Dave, who I'd worked with a number of times, he was going to play a very small part in it. We flipped it, so it's not a woman, it's a man sort of slowly transforming into a woman. And I wouldn't say the idea wasn't there. I'd sort of kicked it around and thought, no, I won't do that. That's not what I'm going to do. But it made the film. So we flipped the idea, and that made the film work, and it gave it a whole nother level. And everybody was basically reacting to that. David didn't have time to learn 5 monologues, so we're sort of like, he's got bits of script that's stuck on the wall that he's like reading and all the rest of it. So that was a real kind of seat of the pants kind of thing. But we'd planned it enough that you could kind of roll with the punches there. But that's what I mean, is that the different kind of elements come into play that you're responding to.
Yes.
And I sort of think if you sort of look at them as positives rather than, it absolutely has to be this, because that's how I imagined it when I was sat there. If you're kind of a bit flexible and nimble with that, then you can obviously, I think it opens it up, because I think the film is absolutely about letting in all those other people as collaborators, ideas and all the rest of it. You have to steer the ship in a particular direction. But the point of that is to not be dogmatic. You've got to be pragmatic, while still at the same. It's very difficult to have the two.
Yeah, it's very hard, as a creative myself, as someone that when you have a vision and an idea how it is quite difficult to just let that go. And we've got to find some balance in between, like you say, steering the ship towards the vision that you had, but also allowing these other collaborators to come in to take it in a slightly different course. And what I find really interesting about that story is how there was an accident, something that, the major lead part can't do the film, and you progress anyway, and it works out for the better. What did you learn from that experience?
What did I learn from that experience? Go with the kind of your instinct, actually, because I'd had that idea before and I'd pushed it to one side. And the thing is, I'd tried to do the film with. There were a number of actors I'd spoken to, actresses, really good ones, that I'd asked, and they all said no or couldn't do it. And we sort of ended up with someone that wasn't right. And when they were kind of not doing it or sort of backing away, I did think about that change before, and I thought could be really interesting. That could really add something to it. So I think it was more that listen to your instinct rather than, because we could have avoided that. Do you know what I mean? We could have planned it the other way around and done it all the way through, and it would have worked fine.
It's very difficult though. It's like quite easy to say, isn't it? Listen to your gut, but listen to the instinct. But our mind kind of, I feel sometimes like in our early days of life, schooling kind of teaches us to use our head more, and as we get into adulthood, we discover that actually we know deep down inside how things should be working.
Yeah, well, I think
there's an instinct, isn't there?
Well, there is an instinct. I think you've got to. It's a balance of the two. I mean, I think you've always got to kind of be rational and sort of analytical about what you're doing, but you've also got to kind of go with what feels right. So it's different. The sort of think and feel element of it. In a way, that's kind of why I like filmmaking, because there's an element of it that's very considered and very controlled, but there's an element of it that's not. There's an element of it that's what you're trying to get out of people or evoke is intangible. It's an emotional response, or it's a connection, or do they find it funny? Do they find it, scary? Did they find it, engaging? Do they, whatever,
Yes, yeah.
And you can kind of manipulate that to a degree with certain techniques, and sound design and all that rest of it. But really, if the things that you do that you want to generate a visceral reaction, I don't think it's just down to that. I think you can, anyone can do a haunted house, kind of a ghost train type ride. You can go boo like once, but if you're trying to sustain something over a longer period of time, I think you've got to have more going on than just that. So it's a balance of the two, I think, and it's true when you're working with actors as well. When you're sort of like directing actors, being open to what they're doing, but also looking at whether it works within the kind of the broader frame. So you've got to kind of, you're always having, I think when you're directing in particular, there is always that head-heart kind of sway that's going on. It needs to sort of be both.
Yes, yeah, one or the other does move. I've seen it move things in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
If you go too much with the gut, I think sometimes I've seen it go into like almost like a worry place, over concern of things and things kind of like falling apart. But yeah, if we go too much with the head and we over control it, it kind of sometimes comes to a stop. So no, I really do agree with this balance idea. But what I'm wondering with you now, James, with these things you've told me about that you've experienced and this kind of philosophy you've got with filmmaking, where did that all start for you? Where did you start to realise that filmmaking is something that you want to do with your life?
A philosophy. I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't even. Well, I started off. I mean, I've always been a lover of film, always engaged with film and television, but particularly film. My grandfather was a big film buff. Well, I wouldn't actually know. He wasn't a film buff. He loved films. He wasn't a film buff because a film buff sounds like he wore a tweed jacket and
yes, and studied.
That wasn't him at all. He was a kid from the night. He was born in the 20s in like East London, and he was of that generation where film became a big part of their life. So he saw King Kong. He always like to tell the story of seeing King Kong at the cinema 3 times on the same day or whatever, Where, I think he saw it down in Colchester, but then he saw it down in the West End as well. He was a big cinema fan, a big cinema goer, and films were a huge part of popular culture at that point. And throughout the rest of his life, I mean, I remember watching. He used to sort of have lots of 16mm films when I was a kid. So I'd watch we'd go round to his house, my brother and I, and my nan, and stay there for the weekend. And he'd like project these little 16mm. Before video, you get these cut down 16mm versions of feature films. So I think he had, what was it, Beneath the Planet of the Apes? No, Escape from the Planet of the Apes. The one where they come to, or was it Beyond the Planet?
Was that the one where
the one set in the 60s?
Where they're going into the one where it's they've got the baby ape.
Yes, that's the one. Yes. Yep, where they're in the 60s.
I'd like to say that's Escape. I should know. They're amongst.
I think it's Beyond. Or is it? Or maybe it's Escape. I can't remember.
No.
There's Planet of the Apes. Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Beneath the Planet of the Apes is the second one where where everyone's radioactive and underground.
And Charlton Heston's in it at the end.
Yeah, yes, that's an easy one.
And it's the one afterwards. Maybe I can't remember. Anyway, whatever one it is, it's that one. So watch that.
Yes.
He had the 2 Peter Cushing, Doctor Who, and the Dalek 60s movies.
Oh, the filmed ones.
The filmed ones, yeah. So
the unofficial films.
The unofficial. Yeah. Well, they're official films, but unofficial.
Yeah, that always confused me.
Yeah. So anyway, so those 2 I watched, and then he had, I think the other one was a cut down of Gone with the Wind for some reason. Anyway, which was like 3 hours down to about 25 minutes. It was a pretty good edit, to be perfectly honest. So I grew up then, and he was the first person I knew who paid to join a video club when they first came along. He was retired at that point, so videos he would show me. I think we must have rented Jaws about 50 times when I was a kid. Watched all the Universal horror films. Watched all of the kind of musicals, classic Hollywood musicals with him. Westerns, different things, so it was very much from him, but then obviously you develop your own kind of interests and your own tastes, and I was a kid born in 75, so Star Wars, all those things were coming out when I was a kid. So I think the first film I ever saw was at the ABC in Romford, was it the Cannon, called the Cannon at the time, but the ABC, the other cinema. My cousin took me to see Star Trek 2. Wrath of Khan. The first film I saw was actually Superman 2. My dad took me to see that, and I saw Star Trek 2 with my cousin. And those 2 films, when I was probably about 5. were
pretty epic films to.
They're huge. So I would say if you go back and look at those are probably the two most sort of profoundly influential kind of like experiences, formative experiences as a kid.
Yes.
And I remember my cousin then taking me to see Dragon Slayer in the West End, and I was terrified, and I actually didn't watch half the film because the sound and what was going on. It wasn't like those films. It was horrible. The dragons were eating the princess. I didn't like it. So it was like, and I've still never rewatched Dragon Slayer.
Really?
It's a very traumatic experience. So I was always a big fan of that. And then when I was younger, I got into my sort of secondary school. I was a big comic book fan. Started reading a lot of British comics every week. Battle, all the kind of adventure titles as well. Not 2000 AD actually, which is ironic because I ended up working for 2000 AD a lot later. But really all the kind of Marvel UK reprints and stuff like that. So I was big into that. And then when I got to sort of about 10, 11, discovered like American comics that actually they were originally published in these much smaller things from states that were in the newsagents. So I was big into the comic book stuff. And that was kind of exploding around that time. This was sort of when Frank Miller had done Dark Knight, and that was it. And Alan Moore had done Watchmen, and they were covered in the paper that my parents used to get. So I'd read that, I'd get those out of the library. And then I think I started going to conventions. So I used to go to the big the UK Comic Art Convention up in at Holborn. I went to that for years. So it was probably about 12, 13 when I went to secondary school. That was roughly the time that was on. And it was the year that Batman came out, the Tim Burton Batman. Okay. So there was this big kind of explosion of my interests.
All kind of like
they're all coming out together. You've got like, there's the Star Trek films and there's a Star Trek show, and then Next Generation starts. So all that stuff's kind of percolating around. It's kind of what you're interested in. That's what I liked as a kid.
Yes, yeah.
And then I guess because of going to the conventions and seeing lots of creative people there, I remember Clive Barker being there. Talking, and Clive Barker was a novelist, and he'd written comics, and he'd made Hellraiser and Nightbreed and all these kinds of films. You could see that this was something that people did. So I sort of carried on going to those conventions for quite a few years, and then I got very into when Twin Peaks started on TV. I remember in 1990, 91, being probably the right age for that. That sort of took me off into a different sort of like taste, I guess. I was old. I was probably 15, I guess, when that came along, and that got me into movies. David Lynch, was making stuff on television unlike anyone else.
Yeah, it was different. It was different, wasn't it? It
was completely revolutionary. It was completely different. I mean, but then I was
flipped television on its head, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, interesting. Back to my granddad. But my granddad, I remember, had seen The Elephant Man. I was telling him about The Elephant Man. It's like 1981. He got it out on video or whatever. Probably one of the first films. And I remember being terrified of that poster in the video shop, with his bag on his head. What is it? Why does he look like that? So that was all sort of percolated away. And it was like, it was him who made that. And then there was Sky started around that sort of time, Sky Movies. So you'd see things like Blue Velvet turn up and all this kind of stuff. And it was all just sort of, and the comics were kind of, the comics I was reading were very, very influenced by the popular culture of the time.
Yes, yeah.
So
this culture of entertainment was heavily informing what you want to be doing with your life.
Yeah, so it's I think culture is kind of the crucial thing, actually. It was a huge kind of, in a way that we don't have it today because it's very fragmented. You'd had a much more kind of, I would say, robust kind of mainstream culture.
Yes, yeah.
So I'd go to the conventions, I'd buy 2000 AD, I'd buy a magazine, I'd buy Deadline magazine, I'd buy The NME, the Melody Maker, and kind of all of that was it was all sort of churning together, and then you'd find Sight and Sound as a result of that. So, and I'm 15, 16, so I'm starting to read this. The people the stories I'm reading in some of the comics, certain writers would be mentioning people like William S. Burroughs. They'd be talking about, Lynch. They'd be talking about Thomas Pynchon. That leads you to novels. That leads you to literature. You'd be thinking about who's Samuel Beckett. But I'd say where the big thing where I started writing though was I did drama at GCSE.
Right.
I couldn't draw, even though I loved comics and I love sort of visual art. I have no ability with a pencil or a pen or a paintbrush at all. So I had to choose an art for GCSE options, and the only one I could do was drama. So what we what I did there was we had to write play and put a play on in sort of for part of our assessment. So me and another kid, we wrote a play, but I kind of basically wrote it. And we did well and got an A for it. And then everybody wanted to be in our next one. So
something was working for you.
Yeah, and we did that. And then I was in a school play when I was 15. I was in Guys and Dolls, and I had a kind of big part in that. Not the biggest part, but a big part. I had the first line of the play. Sing the first line, and I had to hit the right note. That was terrifying. But I did it. And then I remember we had to sort of improvise a line in the final night of the show, and I had to improvise a line, and I did it, and it kind of got a huge laugh. And it was like, yeah, that's great. So it's like, not that I necessarily wanted to be a kind of be on stage or performing, but being in around that world, putting on the show, writing the stuff, putting it on, it was really, really good. So, but I didn't really follow through with that, but I started writing. From then on, I was thinking about what I'd like to write, and really the first thing I wrote was I started writing comics. I mean, that was when I went to university. I managed to sell a couple of stories in my last year at university up to DC Thompson up in Scotland, football picture libraries. But it was like I got paid, I got 180 quid or whatever for writing a story. So it was like that's nice. So a few.
So it gave you some confirmation earlier on that you can do this as a career, because a lot of people are told, even now, that this isn't a career option for you.
No, that's right.
Be careful going into the arts.
But I think as at an early age, because I used to go to the shows, the conventions, I'd see that people were doing that. So I always knew it was an option. I knew it was a thing. And the good thing about those early shows was it wasn't just the people that. It wasn't just the British industry. There was a lot of American industry as well there, and a lot of the Brits had gone and worked for America. So all the kind of basically. DC and Marvel Comics took pretty much all of the best talent from 2000 AD and comics like that and took them to the States. So those guys and girls, but mainly guys, who were working on those things at that time for the big American publishers were British. So I kind of sort of had and I met Alan Grant, he's no longer with us now. Alan Grant's a great figure in British comics. He was he was kind of sub-editor on 2000 AD. He was the co-writer of Judge Dredd for years. But he was probably for a period of time the most successful British comics writer in America, because he was writing Batman for about 10 years.
Okay.
At sort of the height of its sort of commercial success. Created a lot of new characters for it that they used in like the animated shows and all that kind of stuff. But Alan was very good at developing talent or encouraging people, and I was about 20 at this time, and I'd gone to a convention. I hadn't been for a few years, and I wrote a script on spec. I was talking to him at the show, and he very kindly read it and wrote me back a letter and was very encouraging and said, "You've got kind of ability, and do this, and you'll kind of you can do it." So, and from that show as well, I went to a writers group that was sort of set up by the Cartoon Art Trust. David Lloyd, who used to be who was the artist of V for Vendetta. Used to come down and do a monthly kind of art classes, but there were writing groups attached to that. So I used to go to that, and I'd get into the habit of writing a story a week and blah, blah, blah. And then obviously that's when I'd sold those stories as around roughly the same time that I was starting to do that. So yeah, I had a confirmation that I could do it, and then I sort of went back to university. I did a master's degree. And then I became friendly with someone who was a documentary student at the university, and I sort of thought about making a film. Should I make a film? Could I do that? Would that be a thing? Where it plays? Yeah, I'd like to do that. I was getting very into film as well, because I was in London a lot. I was going up to the NFT, BFI a lot, so I was watching a lot of foreign films, a lot of old stuff. I was going to the Prince Charles a lot, double bills, of obscure stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And so that was like film school, really. I just was massively sort of intense, watched like loads of different stuff in that period, going to gigs, doing loads of things. And then we made the little short, and it did all right. It wasn't great, but it was like, I remember I edited, I was trying to write still at that point, and I wasn't having a huge amount of success getting into sort of comics. But I did the film, shot we had like a really long script. It was way too long, and I shot a film, and I guess from what we'd shot, when I took in, it was probably about 15 minutes we could have made it. But what I did, I paid someone, we sat in an edit suite for a week. An editor who knew someone at the university went down to there and made what would have been a terrible 15-minute film into a reasonably good 4-minute film. And I learnt more about writing from that week at the edit suite than anything else. That's where I learnt to write, really. And actually, after that, it was about restructuring things and when you would come in and what you need, about velocity, momentum, shaping stories and stuff like that. And I think it was probably within about 9 months of that I'd started selling stories regularly as a freelance script writer. So I was writing things for Warhammer. And then within about 2 years of that, I sold my first stuff to DC in America.
So what comic books did you start to write for at that time? So
I'd had a little dalliance with 2000 AD. I'd had a story commissioned for 2000 AD. I wrote a script, and then they chucked it in the bin and didn't run it. So
how did that feel? That must
be terrible.
Yeah,
I got the letter from
because that's like a dream job, and
well, it soured me on 2000 AD for about 20 years, which we'll come back to.
Yeah.
So I wrote. So I was. The first things I sold were I was at a convention, funnily enough. I hadn't been going to them for quite a while. I went up to Bristol. So they used to do one there. And I ended up talking to a guy outside of the venue. And it turned out he was the editor of Warhammer Monthly. I'd never played Warhammer. I don't have a thing about role-playing games. But they had a comic. And they also published... prose fiction as well, but they had a comic and they were trying to get new people in. So I sort of stayed in touch with him for a couple of months. He said, "Do you want to pitch an idea?" And I wrote and I pitched him an idea, and he bought it. It was 5 scripts. Suddenly I've got to write 5 scripts on deadline to get in, and it kind of sort of. I mean, I didn't like the stories that were done. The art. I mean, the scripts themselves were okay, but the art was so bad. It's the worst. Still the worst art I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
Not just of any kind of not a comic I've worked on, but in my life. It was so bad. But it ran for 5 parts. That was fun, but he then commissioned me for other stuff as well. And I started to work with some really good people on that title. And I probably wrote 15, 16 stories for them. In the space of a couple of years. And at that Bristol convention, I also met Bob Schreck, who was the group editor of Batman at that time. And he'd been the editor of Sin City over at Dark Horse, and he'd just gone over to do a series at DC. And I stayed in touch with him through the early years of the internet. Email was beginning to become a thing. And I pitched him a couple of ideas, and he was looking for some backup strips for Detective Comics. So I sold a Batman story. I'd always wanted to write Batman. That was my dream as a little kid.
Yes.
And that was my first job in America.
Amazing.
Which also then didn't come out, which also tells you which is also the problem of that. So I got paid to write the script, but he then commissioned me to write an issue of Green Arrow, which did come out. Which was the first thing I think that was published in the States. It was probably published in 2005, I think. Yeah, I think it was 2005. So I did that for them, and I did bits and bobs for 2000 on and off, for DC. I did one job for Marvel on an X-Men Unlimited story. Never really went back to Marvel. Did some stuff for Marvel UK, Panini here, but mainly it was for DC. So I did. Green Arrow, I did stuff, I did Supergirl for quite a while, Justice Society, Justice League, Unlimited.
Some real major titles.
Batman Strikes, major characters, I mean,
yes,
I think, so yeah, I mean, I still get the odd royalty check from some of the stuff that was been reprinted in numerous times. So yeah, I did, that was good. And then I worked in what was called Custom Comics. An editor went up to, upstairs, and that was when DC used to do comics that tied into commercial brands. So I did a couple of video game comics. I did a couple of adaptations of TV projects for them. I did comics for that. That was pretty good money as well, working on those gigs, and it was quite hard because the client was involved quite heavily. The best one I did, I worked on we did all the stuff for The Dark Knight in 2008, so I got to go down to Levston and read the script to The Dark Knight about a year before it came out.
That must have been pretty exciting because
cool.
Nolan did some special stuff with Batman there, didn't he?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to see, I read that. So I read that, they were filming The Dark Knight. It was about a month away from the end of shooting. And I read it under lock and key in the art department down there. And it was like, wow, this is, I liked Batman Begins. I thought it was very, very good. But it wasn't kind of it wasn't a huge departure from what had happened.
Yeah, and it was a good film, but it was The Dark Knight was epic.
Yeah, and it was
on another
also
level.
It's directed and made in a way which is unlike anything like that had been done before.
It was bigger than any normal superhero film.
Yeah, well, it's also not
yes,
film.
yeah.
It's very much you could see where they were pulling from the different comics sources as well. So I did a bunch of stuff that kind of spun out of that, and then I started thinking about filmmaking as well again. I mean, I was getting a bit kind of burnt out by. I did a lot of stuff for DC that didn't come out or got bumped for bigger people, and it was just a constant slog. And then a lot of the editors I'd worked with left or moved to different jobs or moved to different companies. And when you lose your kind of connections, you start to kind of. That's when you've got to build those things up again. So it was like it was very that was very annoying. So I was thinking, well, I'm here in the UK. I'm close to home. I wrote a script on spec, which I sent to the writers' room, the BBC writers' room, and I got a reply that said, "This is actually really good. So we'd love to read the next thing you write." So okay, all right. So I thought, well, I better do that. I did. That didn't go anywhere, but I did write a script that I think I don't know how it ended up there. I remember it was one day I got offered to write Supergirl, even though I wasn't really writing comics for DC at that time. A call out the blue, an email out the blue. On the same day, I got called up by the Dot 2 production office. The script editor of Dot 2 had read a script I'd written, and he said, "I think it's really good. I'm going to give you some notes to change, but this is great. You should kind of follow it." And I kind of I got an agent off the back of that for a while. And then I applied to this sort of coming up scheme, and out of like 1,000 entries, I was one of the people that got sort of selected after an interview and something else to go and do it and go down it. And I met a lot of people on that quite a few people that were on that with me have gone on to do some quite big things. Joy Wilkinson, who was one of the writers on that, she actually didn't, like me, she didn't get picked. They didn't make her film. She wrote an episode of Doctor Who for Jodie Whittaker. She did Lockwood and Son Co. for Netflix.
Okay.
She's just directed a feature film called Seven Keys, which has done for it pretty well on the festival circuit. A friend of mine, Alex Stewart, was another guy on there. His film was made. He's written Tin Star, and he's written for various other shows, Ackley Bridge and all that on telly. And quite a few of the directors, I think, on that ended up directing. I think one of them's directed the Blade Runner TV show that's coming for Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had people come in and talk to us. So that was quite good. That kind of got you. But I wrote the circuitous way of getting to this is that the thing I wrote on that 3-day boot camp is basically the film that I screened here this morning. And that I remember the woman on the course, the main producer, telling me that you got to let the director direct. And I kind of thought actually. But there were some problems when we were shooting it over the course of the day with the actress, and I ended up directing quite a lot of the film because she wouldn't speak to the director. So I kind of thought, and actually what happened at the end of it is the director got picked to go on the course, and they didn't pick me. So I was very pissed off at that. But I then thought, well, if you're gonna, maybe you should direct stuff.
Yeah, it must be really difficult for you as a writer to know these stories, come up with these characters, then just hand it over to someone else that doesn't kind of know what they're doing with the material.
Yeah, I guess so.
One of my I know from personal experience, one of my closest friends is a writer, and recently he wrote a play that I directed.
Yeah.
And I know that he found it quite difficult sitting there in the audience and watching me do things wrong because it wasn't what he envisioned.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
And not necessarily wrong, differently, but it's hard to sit through it as the original creator.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think, I did. That's what I did. I then started to make some stuff and made a couple of shorts, and I knew I had some actor friends, so I kind of pulled them in, worked on stuff, made a couple of shorts. That was quite good. Then my daughter was born in 2013, so I sort of had a period where I stepped off of that for a while. Obviously, she took up the most of the next 2 years. I was always, through all of this, I was also teaching. I still do lecture at university. So I was doing more of that, but then I was starting to think, well, I wasn't really writing comics at that point. I got back into doing that again to earn more money, and also I was not making stuff. So I'd written a couple of feature scripts that had been kind of, people had sort of had some interest in around that time as well. But the thing with features is they just sit there and don't get made. So you want to be doing stuff. So I was thinking, I want to make another film, but I also want to write. So I saw that Doctor Who Adventures was starting up, and I used to work for Panini on the Marvel Heroes comic. And I emailed the office, and they commissioned 3 stories off of me off the bat. So I wrote some of that. I wrote a few episodes of that. So a couple of prose stories, about 3 comic strips. And then I kind of got, off the back of that, I got to write for the Titan comics series, the Doctor Who. So I did just a bunch of stuff for their different lines. And off of that, I started working with some people that were working at 2000. So I went and I pitched 2000 AD, and then I think it was 2017. I've been working with 2000 AD ever since.
And you're happy with them again now?
Yeah, I've done.
And they're now back in favour.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah.
So
the scar's still there.
You've got some really amazing credits and characters to your back catalogue there. My mind's going to somewhere now that as a fan of this material, as a fan of the comic books, something that I often get frustrated with is the interpretation of some of these characters in film. And then quite often, we talked about one that's done really well, was The Dark Knight, but quite often you'll get characters that the filmmakers clearly didn't understand who the character was in the first place. Why do you think that happened?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, isn't there? I mean, I think there's...
Because to me, I'm sitting here thinking, I want to see your Supergirl film. I want to see your interpretation. Here's one, Judge Dredd.
Well, Dredd's a character that's very difficult to adapt, isn't he? I mean, I think that's... I can remember in '95 being at that convention I was talking about, and I got pulled up on stage. They were doing a kind of... they did a poll. It was who's seen. It was the summer that Batman Forever had come out. Tank Girl, Judge Dredd, the Stallone.
Yes, yeah. So, and that was killing comic book movies in a way.
Well, Batman Forever was really successful.
Yes, and I enjoyed that. that.
Batman Forever's not as. I mean, it's not.
It was a fun comic book movie for kids.
It's made for kids. It's very stylish. It's still got it's still got one foot in the Tim Burton films, and it's also actually is very kind of it does get the source material. It doesn't get the villains. I think where he gets it wrong is the Riddler's fine, doesn't get Two-Face, doesn't get Two-Face at all, other than on a kind of like a totally superficial level. So that kind of works against the film, but as a kind of they understand sort of the kind of the classic kind of 50s, 60s version of Batman and Robin that's sort of there. And it kind of works on that level. And it's very beautifully made. It's visually really striking.
And I that's a film that I remember seeing in the cinema very... That's in that lives in my memory forever, seeing Batman Forever.
Yeah, forever.
At the cinema.
But then the Tim Burton films are vastly superior on an artistic level.
But then it went into Batman and Robin, and
well, actually, I took my daughter in the summer. They re-released them, didn't they? They showed. I took her to see Batman Forever, and I remembered that, and I watched it. And I hadn't seen it in years.
No, I haven't seen it.
And I thought it stood up much better than I imagined.
Oh, really?
Actually, it did. Actually, it was better than I thought. And I sort of took it. She then wanted to see Batman and Robin, so we went to see Batman and Robin, and that was even worse than I remember. And that was not because actually of all the things that it was quite. It's just so shoddy and rushed, and it's just they made it like.
And the story was weak, and
well, there isn't a story.
No.
It's the same film as the previous one. It's just sort of cut and pasted, but it's just shoddy. You know, you can see George Clooney was only available on certain days, so all of his scenes are in one room. You know, there's all this stuff of Alfred that's on his own. You know, it's kind of just done from making films. You can see how it was put together and made cynically, because it was made purely to sell merchandise and be a big hit. So you're talking about why do they go wrong? I think they go wrong because they're very hard to do, full stop. I think if you go back and look at those adaptations of comic book movies, the original Superman is great. Well, the first two Superman films are great. They get it right. The initial Batman films get it right, or a version of that. They get a take on it that works, and it works as a movie. Maybe Supergirl doesn't in 1984. Superman 3 and Superman 4 really don't. Superman 3 less so, but Superman 4 in particular. By the time you're getting into, you see Dick Tracy, it doesn't quite work.
It
so
almost started to make, in the movie world, comic book movies were kind of a joke, kind of at that time.
I mean, I don't think it's until you get to sort of like the Matrix and the first X-Men. I think the most important, I mean, everyone says Blade, but that's kind of not really a comic book movie in the same way. The first superhero movie of the modern era is probably The Matrix. But I would say the first one that's successful as a superhero movie is obviously X-Men. And they have a take on the material that works as a movie. And they kind of understand what the intrinsic kind of parts of the property are. I would say that a lot of the problem today is there have been too many superhero movies. So it's hard to do something that's different. But I also think as well, you've got everybody wants I think the problem with them now is that no one's got the freedom to make them. Christopher Nolan, Bryan Singer, Richard Donner, Tim Burton had a certain amount of artistic freedom to make the films in the way that they could. I mean, you could have made Batman and it could have been like Superman in 1978. Which you could argue is a bit what Batman Begins is like. But he didn't. He took a very strong creative choice. If you look at Richard Donner's Superman in 78, and you look at the version of Superman that they were going to make until he came along, it would have been a disaster. The test footage and the screen tests, and until it was Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz that had this kind of like vision for doing it. Look at what Kevin Feige and all those people did with Marvel Studios, especially when Marvel at the beginning. Marvel at the beginning was an independent production outfit. So they were making their own decisions about what would work in those films, and their instincts paid off. But if you look at the studio films that were made with Marvel properties in the years before then, like Elektra, the original Daredevil with Ben Affleck, let's think of any other ones that came along around that time. They made that really bad Punisher film with Thomas Jane. They made another one with Ray Stevenson that wasn't very good. They made the Ang Lee Hulk doesn't really work. I mean, the bits of it that do, but not a lot of it.
Pretty much everything they sold off to Sony kind of went in that direction.
Well, the only ones that worked were the first two Sam Raimi Spider-Man. Because Sam Raimi understood the material. So I think that's it. But I think today there's more because these films are now hugely successful. They are basically what Hollywood is. It's what kept Hollywood afloat for the last 15 years.
Yes.
There is too much sort of like... I mean, the key thing is like they make Superman in 2013, and Man of Steel, whatever, in 2013, and they immediately... It does well financially, but it's not at the level that they want it to be, which may be misguided, I would say. But they then say, well, we've got to have Batman in it, the next one. So that's a mandate that's been placed on them to put. So
the creativity is being forced and channeled in.
Well, it's people that have got views on what the film should be that aren't necessarily the people that should be making those decisions. Now, they are the people who work for the studio and all the rest of it. The whole thing in that type of thing is a trade-off. It's amazing that anything ever gets made that's any good when there are that many people involved.
Yes,
but that is the problem, I would say, today. I think in the past there'd be bad attempts to make films because people didn't understand the property or whatever else. But if you look at, considering how few superhero films were made from, say, the late 70s through to, say, the 90s, the interesting thing there is that there's most of them are pretty good. The first two Supermans, the first few Batmans. Okay, the Supermans go off the boil a little bit later on. But if you look in you compare it to, say, the way Marvel films are, for me, they're very like the Star Trek films of the 1980s. They're very clearly made on a kind of, the people that understand the brand, and they make them relatively consistently. They don't tear up any trees in terms of what they are as in terms of filmmaking or the grammar of cinema or anything else, but they're very well constructed in the main across the board. Some are better than others. You know, you make that many films, of course, that's going to be a problem. But they kind of, the people in charge of Star Trek in that period understood what that was.
Yeah,
you could argue after that, that's where it goes wrong. But particularly in the 80s. And then I'd say with the people in charge of Marvel, because you know they have been the kind of industry standard for making that many films on a production line and them actually being good and financially successful. Their hit rate is probably better than anyone else's. Compare that to Warner Brothers with DC. They haven't got a clue. I mean, not so much they haven't got a clue, but they don't really understand what the people in charge of the movie divisions don't really understand the properties
that they have.
No, that's right. So, and also they've changed those people so many times. So, they know that Batman makes money, so they'll get Batman in. You know, they'll make a film about the Flash, but they'll put 2 Batman in it.
Yes,
you know that's sort of like, and that can be entertaining and all the rest of it. But that kind of,
but it doesn't make for a story, and it doesn't make for the opportunity that the Flash,
and also a lack of faith in the character that you're supposedly making, and we'll see what happens with their stuff that they're relaunching now. There's another Superman film.
So DC's going through this big rebrand, aren't they? They're James Gunn's heading it up, and I do enjoy his films. I do enjoy him as a filmmaker, and so I do have a bit of hope. And the trailer looks fun. It looks like there's elements of that trailer that I was like, this is more the Superman that I grew up reading than what Zack Snyder did with Superman.
Yeah,
Zack Snyder's Superman, that didn't. He looked good, but that was it for me. There were, and he was very good at cinematography. He did some lovely shots, but there was no story there. There was no character there in Superman for me, and I want something that goes back to that Christopher Reeve Superman. I want something that goes back to those 80s comic books.
Well, Superman. I think the problem with Superman is that Superman's been done so many times as well. I mean, Superman hasn't been off television.
No.
You had Lois and Clark, Smallville. You've had this recent one that's been on TV. Other animated shows. And yet in that time as well, you've had Superman Returns, Man of Steel. Now this one, these characters have a life as well. And I think
maybe are these characters getting too diluted?
Well, I think they're too old. I mean, and they're too overexposed. I mean, how many, the Batmans and Supermans of this world are. I mean, Batman's kind of interesting because Batman can be or has been sort of reinterpreted many times and done many ways very well. There are at least 2. I wasn't a huge fan of the Robert Pattinson Batman.
No,
not for him or it was a very well made film. I just didn't find it very interesting or different enough from what had come before.
Yes,
it felt too much like Batman Begins with a bit.
It felt for me that those films felt like a cheap Christopher Nolan.
Yeah,
it kind of felt like maybe it could have fitted in as a TV version of.
Yeah, it kind of felt like a cross between the Christopher Nolan film and the Zack Snyder one in a way. It's got a similar kind of.
But that whole thing of not doing anything new.
It didn't feel. It doesn't feel new or different. Whereas I think they've done it a number of times in the past, and it's been different. But how many times can you go to the well? Basically, it's the same as if you look at Sherlock Holmes, if you look at Dracula. Those characters have been endlessly kind of reinterpreted. But they don't get done as often now as they used to because they've been done,
Yes, yeah.
So they've done with Sherlock Holmes. They did the Benedict Cumberbatch, Robert Downey Jr. That was the last big kind of moment where that was big in the culture. And I guess that show with John Lee Miller as well. That's kind of rested for a long time now. Dracula intermittently they do versions of.
Yes, yeah. They have a season, have a phase for it.
But I don't think the thing with this is that can you rest these properties like for very long? The corporate kind of necessity says you can't. So you end up kind of Superman gets rebooted. So when was the last time Superman was on screen?
Well, there's the TV series going on right now.
The TV series is going on, so that's what that. I mean, Smallville went on through all the others.
Yes, yeah.
You had the Justice League film. not just the Zack Snyder kind of one they released on Blu-ray, but the one that they kind of botched together with Joss Whedon. That was 2017, so that will be another. So I think it was like 2006 Superman Returns, 2013 was Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman was like 2016, wasn't it? Justice League was 2017, 2018. This one will be 2025.
Yeah,
but
so
you've got 3 completely different versions of the character, or 3 revamps of the character, reboots of the character, in the space of 19 years.
Yeah,
and Spider-Man, I guess, has had that as well. Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield, and then Tobey Maguire. But that's been done more effectively. But again, how many times can you do that? I mean, it's difficult. I think that there is a limited number of times you can
retell it.
I think Marvel's approach is more more sensible in that you kind of you change the characters. You change.
See, whereas where Marvel is at the moment, they're going through this phase of doing all the sub characters. So they've done all they've done the Captain America, they've done the Iron Man, they've done the Hulk, and now they're going to all these like lower level characters that aren't quite as interesting.
That's why they're lower level characters.
Yeah, exactly. But that's making the films not quite as interesting.
Well, no, that's right. But yeah, at the same time, so I saw the new Captain America film a couple of weeks ago. I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was quite good fun. I mean, but it's quite good fun. It's like it's not.
I think we were getting new stuff for a while with Marvel, weren't we? We were seeing each Marvel film consistently offering something new, but within the same universe. Whereas now, it's just
they've spread it too thin with the TV stuff. I think that's the other thing.
You have to know the full universe to get a real good idea of what's going on.
Well, you do. I mean, I think, by the same token, though, if you look at the massive success of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Deadpool and Wolverine, it isn't. I think people will turn out to see them.
Oh, definitely. I'm a sucker for it. I will go and see every single.
I think that you've got to be. What's a real? No one cares about Captain America when he's not. He's the other Captain America. They don't care. I mean, it's like there are people that will go and they'll see it and it'll probably do okay. It'll do okay, but no one really cares. I mean, the worst one is the Marvels, the the Captain Marvel thing.
Yeah.
They released the trailer, didn't they, just before it came out, where they had to tease. The trailer was basically little sort of like super cuts of the first Captain Marvel, and then it was of Miss Marvel, and then there was a bit from like, I can't remember what the other one was, WandaVision, where the other character was from.
Yes.
And it's like, if you're putting a trailer in the cinema, I saw that in the cinema, but you're having to kind of say that this is
where they've been.
It's like, that's not going to work. And funnily enough, it
doesn't. No.
So I think, you have to be, there isn't, where they've sort of done too much of the kind of interweaving with the Disney Plus shows, but I think also as well, how many people watch those shows? I think it's the other thing. It's like streaming. It's like how many people watch those shows?
Yeah,
but not loads of them. So
they're going with quantity over quality, aren't they?
That was a big. That was a decision.
That
was a decision they made, and I think they paid the price for that. They're sort of course correcting from that. That's fine. You'll never see it be as big and successful as it was in 2018, 2019 when they did those 2 Avengers films, because actually those things that had never been done before.
For me as well, it kind of peaked at that point.
Of course,
that was the perfect finale of everything that had come before.
But the corporate mentality is you can't
stop. Have a finale.
You can't stop. So there is no finale. It's everything. Yes, and this is the comic book thing as well. It's like it doesn't matter if you tell the greatest Batman story ever. Next month there'll be another Batman story. There'll be another Wonder Woman. There'll be another X-Men story. It's like everything can happen in EastEnders, but next week there'll be another episode of EastEnders. It's the same as that. It's like the model of what they do is not based on it being a finite thing. It isn't, a novel. It isn't a kind of. It's ongoing storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's the trouble when you try and kind of map this onto a universe. Is that the universe is an ever-expanding balloon. But balloons can also pop, and these are very expensive films to make. And but so that's my.
So your position, you being a comic book writer, moving into films, do you want to move into a place where you make a superhero or a comic book movie of any type? Is that somewhere that you would like to go? Because, like I said before, I would like to see movies made by someone like you, someone that truly understands the source material.
Well, I think there are the people who have, aren't there? I think James Gunn's a big comic book fan, and you can tell that in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, Suicide Squad, stuff like that. I think David Goyer is a huge comic book fan, and that comes off in the things that I think he's the unsung hero of the Christopher Nolan Batman films in a lot of ways, because he understood the character in such a profound way, not just in terms of understanding the character, but he knew what stories to pull from, which little bits to pull from, and that's why those films work really well. They don't look like those comic books. A lot of comic book fans would say, it's far too realistic and it should be more fun and all the rest of it. But actually, if you look at what they've taken and built on the basis of, it's incredibly faithful to the comics. Incredibly faithful. I personally, I never really have had a. In my head, I'm a fan. I like comic movies a lot. I like fantasy and science fiction storytelling. Obviously, that isn't necessarily why I got into making films. I'd like to make something on a bigger scale, maybe something more science fiction-y. I don't mean Star Wars-y science fiction, but sort of those types of ideas, that type.
Does that take you to kind of Doctor Who kind of stuff, or
it's Doctor Who science fiction? No, I always think it's more science fantasy. I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I love Doctor Who.
So something you would actually like to come more away from these characters and something more
I'm not really interested. I mean, to be honest, I'd be more inclined to... I'd be more inclined to do Doctor Who than the superheroes. I mean, because the trouble with superheroes is that what can you do with them that hasn't already been done? Do you see what I mean? And if you were dealing with the big corporations, what would you be able to do? Most of the people that get signed up to do these projects are signed up because they can be pushed around.
Yes, yeah.
Because so that the corporate...
so that they fit in with the model that they have.
You're delivering a product for them, and this has happened to lots of different people down the years. So I would be more inclined to see, to do something like that. I'd like to do something in the more sort of... I would like to do something more science fiction based. I mean, there's elements of those sorts of films that I think would be interesting, but that isn't really what I did. I mean, my superhero... I mean, Batman was always my favourite character as a kid, and I'm sure you could kind of do Batman. Like, if you could come up with an idea on Batman. I mean, because I think Batman is one of the characters that you can kind of reinterpret, and sort of it. And maybe it's because he wears a mask, so it's not kind of tied to the same actor. There's a kind of something about it that gives you the kind of space to do that. But I've never really thought I've never really had any great ambition to do a superhero film or something like that. I wouldn't. Dredd, is interesting.
I guess similar to Batman, it's because he's wearing the helmet, and it's the...
Yeah, but I think Dredd hasn't ever been done, has he, properly on screen? I mean, I say that.
Carl Urban, the
2012 Dredd.
That was quite... that was okay.
Yeah, I think they got Dredd's character right, but I don't think the world is... The Mega City 1 is right in that film. I don't think there's not the humour, the satirical element of Dredd. There's not the broader kind of universe of Mega City 1. But they got Dredd right in that. In a way that they didn't get Dredd right.
Because there's a calling for him to come back and do another one, isn't there? There's because that character, because it felt right. Well,
the thing is, though, Dredd didn't make any money, did it? That's the trouble. So it's unfortunate for Dredd. It's twice it's not worked. To be blunt about it, that's why the Carl Urban Dredd is made for such a small budget in comparison to because the budget was there for the first Dredd, the Stallone Dredd. Wasn't there for the second one, and the rights were much cheaper to get because it was a property that hadn't worked. So Dredd, unfortunately, while it's become a cult film and it's a decent film, a decent science fiction action film, I don't think it's exceptional.
No,
it's not RoboCop, it's not District 9, it's not Total Recall. And kind of really, that's what you want from that. You want from a Dredd or 2000 AD film. You want it to be like that. It's got to have that level of kind of... I mean, they're making... Duncan Jones is making this animated mocap, I think it's mocap, but certainly animated version of Road Trooper that's going to come out at some point that Rebellion are producing themselves. So hopefully that'll work out and that'll sort of open up the catalogue of characters there. But it's not really, I mean, it's not really something I've ever really sort of been drawn towards. I like, film-wise, I'm much more interested in humanity than superhumanity. That's kind of really where I...
Well, I think that's when these, even in these comic books, that's when it works best, isn't it? When Doctor Who doesn't go to those extreme places of fantasy, or when even Star Trek doesn't go there, when it goes on more the human level of stuff, that's when the real good stories come out.
Well, I certainly think that you resonate more with your audience when you do stories that are more like that. I think with Doctor Who and Star Trek, they're quite similar in many ways. They're a kind of a format which means you can go into lots of different ways. You can play those stories in lots of different ways because they're kind of anthology show. They're shows rather than movies. I mean, that's what's the problem when they make a Star Trek movie, is that as good as this movie, I think the films with the original cast are good generally. 2, 4, 6, they're all a 3. They're good films, but they're very much action movies. You know, they're not really kind of like there's a mystery. So, whereas Star Trek as a TV show is much more than is not an action movie.
Yes,
it's a kind of it's a story of the week. It can be, and it shifts from genre. It can be, you know, there's a lot of stories of possession, civilizations on the brink of collapse. You know, there's allegorical stories. There's more whimsical stories, and Doctor Who's the same. It's because it's got an anthology kind of format. You can kind of it goes through different genres every week.
There's lots of room for play.
Yeah, but when you make a film, I think you've got to have a kind of clarity of purpose in the kind of to drive you forward for 90 minutes or 2 hours. So, you know, the classic for Star Trek is one of the reasons why Ralph Khan sort of worked so well, is that it's a revenge film. And then it's a revenge film and a cat and mouse film, and it's about characters who have met in the past in the TV show. It all comes back to it's kind of anti the format of Star Trek in that Star Trek goes forward every week. You don't really have things you did in the past coming back to you. But in Ralph Khan, it's the first time where it says these things happened and they have a consequence.
Yes.
So it's a kind of it's in a way it's a break-in of the format of Star Trek, and it actually infuses Star Trek sort of moving forward because all the TV shows after that have elements of that in it.
True, yeah.
Much more continuity. So. But that's the best movie because it's got this kind of relentless kind of forward propulsion of what are the stakes, and I think that's the thing with those types of stories. I mean, it's true of any of the type of things we're talking about. Do you care? Is the story? Does the spectacle is that justified by the stakes of the story? It's like always use the example of like the Lord of the Rings. Like it's about the end of civilization. They're fighting to save civilization, and that supports the spectacle. When you come to see The Hobbit, it's about a bunch of dwarves wanting their gold back.
Yes, yeah.
And suddenly, and they're trying to do it in the same way as Lord of the Rings, but it doesn't work.
No,
it doesn't have it. The story doesn't kind of support that level of spectacle. The drama rings false. It's a children's story that should probably be told in one film. Not bloated out.
Yeah, well, I haven't even gone to watch the second. I didn't see the second and third one because it just was. I didn't kind of care about those people.
Well, there's not enough. There's not enough there to care
about. No,
exactly.
No.
So you've got to have the sort of stakes of the story. The humanity of it has got to be kind of at the thing. And the thing with any fantasy, if fantasy doesn't have to be realistic, but it's got to be believable. And that's
how you do it.
That's the crucial thing.
That's how you do it. You connect it to the humanity.
Well, it goes back to Richard Donner with Superman, verisimilitude. It's like that's the thing. It's got to be kind of
planted in the real world.
Yeah,
fantasy, but here,
and it's heightened. It's not necessarily real. It's not really realistic, but it has to be believable. You have to believe that these characters. I mean, that's a tricky thing because it's about tone. It's about the way you set everything up and all the rest of it. But ultimately you have to believe what you're watching, and if you don't, it doesn't work. I mean, and that's but it's true of every story. It's true of everything you do. But it's doubly true, triply true of like anything that's dealing in fantasy. I mean, if you go back and look at Donna did that with The Omen. We're here at Horror Festival. You look at The Omen and you look at The Exorcist as two films, roughly coming out at the same time, dealing in, hoary old kind of sort of horror sort of tropes, possession and the Antichrist. And the reason they both work is that they take it completely seriously. There's no winking at the audience. There's no, sort of breaking of the fourth wall. I mean, some things you can do that, but in those things where you're playing it, they play it completely straight and it works. And that's why they were successful.
Yes, yeah. Well, James, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like I could talk to you all day about movies and comic books. This is what I like to talk about. This is what I like to hear about.
Misspent youth.
Well, I don't know, actually. I think it's a great life, enjoying movies and comic books. And, I encourage anyone that's not enjoying those things to give it a try, which there is the fan base for these things have grown really big, haven't they?
Yeah, well, I think they are. I mean, the fan base... for this, I mean, I think there's a fan base that would never read a comic book, that would go and see a comic book movie, quite clearly, because the sales of comic books are not the level of revenue that come from the big sort of superhero movies. The material, yes, absolutely, has transcended its roots in that sense, and there is a huge audience and a huge appetite for that stuff. I mean, and that hasn't gone away. But you can see that in every generation, whether it's Twilight, whether it's whatever is the fantasy material, generally speaking, is always the most popular. Fantasy, science fiction, that escapist.
Yeah, escapism.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess that's what we come to the cinema for.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing today, James. I really do appreciate it.
No problem.
If anyone wants to find out a bit more about you, they want to visit some of the comic books that you've wrote, where do we find you?
Oh God! I suppose we've got an Instagram page. You can find me on there. That's at James Peaty, where there'll be things that are sort of up there. I don't actually have a website. It's terrible, isn't it? Talking about science fiction and
What one of your comic books should I jump in and have a read of? What one are you most proud of?
There's just Hachette have just published a collection of 2 volumes of the series I did for 2000 AD called Script Tracer, which is probably available through the website. So that's 2 hardback books of that, that's a complete story. So I wrote that from 2018 until 2022, 23.
Okay.
So I wrote that. That was in 2000 AD over that period of time. 7 volumes. It's about, I think both volumes are about 150 pages, 200 pages. So those are available through the Hachette website. If you go to Hachette, you'll find that. And look for, I can't remember what this 2000 AD collection, but there were 2 volumes of that. I think they're $9.99 each. What else is there? Of the other stuff, the collection of the Road to the 13th Doctor Who.
Right, okay.
Was, from Titan is a collection of stuff I did for Titan that came out in 2018. That was 2018. Okay. I would say those are the 2. If you want to go to get a collection, those would be the ones.
Wonderful. Well, I will be checking them out. Thank you so much, James. And if anyone has been watching or listening to this conversation, we appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thank you.